Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Stellium Astrology podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie James. I'm the founder of stelliumastrology.com. I'm a tutor at the London School of Astrology, and I also used to write horoscopes for Elle Magazine UK, as well as a variety of other publications and websites. So today I am talking about Mercury Retrograde. I probably should have talked about Mercury Retrograde ages ago, but I just didn't. And maybe it's because I am somebody who has Mercury Retrograde myself in my natal chart. So that's what I'm talking about, not just any old Mercury Retrograde. I'm talking about natal Mercury Retrograde. Now, it's an interesting phenomena because obviously Mercury turns retrograde approximately 3 to 4 times a year, and I've explained in other episodes that Mercury is never more than 28 degrees away from the Sun. That's what we call maximum elongation, when he's at, say the Sun's at 0 Gemini and Mercury's at 28. At that point, that's where we would see him slow down and reverse, and the Sun will carry on moving forward, and then they will cross paths. So Mercury retrograde, it through their little dance, he's never too far either in front or behind of the Sun, and when he does get too far, the dance has to change, and he catches up, and he'll do his little moonwalk for a while. So I'm not really here to explain the anatomy or the physics of Mercury retrograde, more the kind of understanding of what it means in your natal chart. There are quite good explanation videos online of how Mercury retrograde appears, this optical illusion that we get in our skies. But a good way to try and understand it is if you've ever seen people, if you've ever been sitting on a train and then you've got another train travelling next to you that's going slightly slower, so you're both travelling forwards, but one train's slightly slower than the other, then the other train will appear to be travelling backwards. It's what usually makes me feel travel sick, actually, if I look out the window when I'm on the train. So it almost looks like the other train's going backwards, and suddenly you're like, oh gosh, my head, it's just a bit weird. And that train, though is travelling forward, is in retrograde motion in a sense, because it's actually appears to be moving backwards when it's not. In the same way, when you watch the Olympics and you see cyclists in the velodrome, you've got some cyclists who are on the outer ring and some who are on the inner ring. So when they start out, and they have to take that first corner, it almost looks like the people on the outer ring of the velodrome are suddenly behind, because as they all take off, and they're not all necessarily going at the same speed, but they're all going in the same direction, the ones on the, from that perspective, the ones who are travelling slightly slower almost appear like they are actually going backwards compared to the other cyclists that seem to be steaming ahead. So I kind of think of it like that a little bit. I think it's an interesting way of kind of looking at it. And another thing, a song lyric that I always think of whenever I think of any retrograde planet is, I think the song's called To Have and To Have Not by Billy Bragg, and the lyrics go, just because you're going forwards doesn't mean I'm going backwards. And I always think of that whenever I think of Mercury retrograde. So in the natal chart, a natal chart is a snapshot in time, a moment where we are, when we enter the earth, when we enter consciousness, when we pop out of these birthing portals or hospitals or wherever the hell you were born, and that moment where you took your first breath, that first connection with the ether, life and air, is that moment where the planetary snapshot is taken, and all the planets are exactly where they are, doing what they're doing. Some are retrograde, some are direct. Maybe in your case, none of them are retrograde, all of them are direct. maybe in some other people's cases there's a few retrograde planets, or some people, I think one of the girls that I studied astrology with had 5 retrograde planets. That's quite remarkable. That's something that you would that's more remarkable than if you had just maybe 3, depending on which planets are retrograde. Basically, it's always more remarkable if you have personal planets retrograde in the natal chart. So Mercury, Venus and Mars, if they're retrograde, obviously that's a bit more remarkable than Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, who all tend to be from 4 to 5 months out of the year tend to be retrograde, because of the speed that they travel and things like that. So Mercury retrograde is one of those ones that if you're born with Mercury retrograde, it's definitely more common than if you were born with Venus or Mars retrograde. But what does it actually mean? So as somebody who has Mercury retrograde natally, I've looked into this, and I definitely think that there's something, it's definitely very interesting. Some different astrologers say different things. So I think I saw an astrologer called Dick van der Mark. He's a Dutch astrologer, and he's very good. He did a lot of work with Lilith as well, and he was talking about retrograde planets, and he was talking about them in the sense that particularly Mercury retrograde, people with Mercury retrograde tend to have a bit more of an internal monologue. Their internal processes seem to be a bit more heightened. So it may be that they are having they may just appear to most people to be sitting there looking around, kind of just taking things in. But actually there can be an awful lot going on internally. He said that they could be sitting down for dinner, pick up a knife and fork and really analyse the knife and fork before they start using it. And I kind of related to what he said when he said that, because I thought, I'm somebody that kind of looks, I always put it down to being having a lot of Aquarius in my chart, but actually it's interesting because I do have a bit of a weird kind of way of seeing the world. I look around me and I think, that's odd. Things that most people don't even, I'm really going to clutch at straws here to try and think of an example, but it could be anything. It could be just like a normal everyday kind of thing. And I could go, isn't it funny how people do this? Isn't it funny? And it's almost like you're a bit of an alien watching the world and its processes, and kind of deeply analysing, why do we do this? And why is it second nature for everybody else to be going out and doing this, when actually it's actually, it might not be odd. It might just be a human thing to do. But if you actually analyse behaviour, you can sometimes sit there and go, gosh, it is very strange. Humans do strange things, or we do have strange customs, So there's a very internal monologue going on where they're usually, looking around and trying to figure out what's going on around them. I don't know if they're necessarily deep thinkers in the same way that a Mercury-Pluto person might be a deep thinker. I happen to be Mercury-Pluto as well, so that kind of might add to that kind of the fact that I resonate with that statement that Dick van der Mark said. However, I do think there is something to it. There is definitely something to it. There's a whole conversation that goes on internally before the conversation that comes out externally. Obviously, if Mercury's a key planet for you as well, Mercury's key for all of us in many senses, because we all, like I said, Mercury is the sun's PA. So, everything that we process, our environment, how we engage with everything, has to go through Mercury before it gets to the sun, and it's filtered through Mercury's lens to the sun. So it is a very important planet for all of us. It's our communication style, it's our mind, it's literally how we process things. It's our processor, and it's the way we speak. It's our kind of what we sound like. It's just literally, Mercury is very important in everybody's natal chart. However, for some people, like myself, for example, Mercury is my ruling planet, my chart ruler, because I have a Gemini ascendant. If you're a Gemini sun, for example, and you're born with Mercury retrograde, if that's what I mean by it being key. If it was like the ruler of your big 3, for example, sun, moon or ascendant, then you're going to have an even more interesting connection to your Mercury placement. And if it's retrograde, it's going to be even more a thing for you. It's going to be more prominent. Another thing Dick Van der Mark said was that Mercury retrograde kind of indicates where we are kind of reincarnated in a sense, and we've got unfinished business that we need to come in and deal with. And when I first got into astrology, I was always open to the idea of reincarnation, but I'm one of those people that kind of feels a bit icky about talking about stuff like this, because I think it almost takes you down a tunnel where there's like a belief system, and I kind of like the idea of not having a belief system about this, and kind of just coming from a perspective of, a removed perspective where we don't have to believe things, where we can be analytical, where we can kind of engage with this information that the chart gives us without having to go into tunnels of belief, because belief is almost, if you believe something, I think it's Robert Anton Wilson always said, belief is the death of intelligence. Not sure if that's quite the quote, but just kind of the second that you believe in something, you almost throw out everything else out the water, like everything else is gone because you commit yourself to an idea. And I don't like that, but I'm not saying you can't believe in anything to do with astrology. It's just my personal preference. Maybe that's my Mercury in Aquarius. However, I do feel like there is some kind of truth to having unfinished business in life and coming back to fulfill. And the longer I'm in astrology, the more I do think that we are just I do kind of feel like reincarnation is kind of a thing. It's really hard to explain, and I don't know if it's more about ancestral memory, ancestral inheritance, and a kind of genetic ancestral reliving of certain scenarios and situations that our ancestors need us to fulfill for them. I don't know. I honestly, that could be a whole nother show. However, I would love to know your thoughts on it, actually, if you want to get in touch and tell me what you think, because I think that it would be an interesting one to explore. However, actually, as somebody with Mercury retrograde natally, I was born on the day Mercury went retrograde. Now, what's interesting to look at when you have Mercury retrograde in your natal chart is to look at how far into Mercury retrograde you were born. Now, I think I mentioned it with my interview with Philip Daniel Miles, that I was born on the day Mercury went retrograde. So if I look at my date of birth in my big fat ephemeris, there's a technique which you may or may not be familiar with called progressions, secondary progressions. And secondary progressions is a kind of predictive technique. It's also a kind of a technique which is a more a way of moving into your chart in a much more psychological way, working with yourself and your deeper psychology. It's interesting. It's not my forte. I'm more of a solar arc directions kind of girl, which I discussed with Frank Clifford on the podcast. Which, if you want to check that out, I think there's an enhanced video on my podcast channel or my YouTube channel as well. However, if you find your date of birth in the ephemeris, so for me, I was born on the 8th of January, 1983, and if you go into, if you have a look, so Mercury stationed retrograde, so it was literally turning retrograde the day. It may have been like quite late in the day before. And so for my first few years of my life, so basically with secondary progressions, what happens is you count a day for each day. You count a year for each day. It's really hard because I'm going into secondary progressions here to explain. But from the day I was born, you go count how many days Mercury was retrograde. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So approximately, and it's slightly different with progressions, but you can figure it out. You look at your progressions, the sun moves a degree per year. So did I say about 19 or 20? So the sun would have moved. I would have been about 19 or 20 when Mercury turned direct by progression. So actually, it was only 19 or 20 days that he was retrograde for. And so when I was first born, I was born into Mercury retrograde. And, that was just a normal retrograde period. But by progression, it means that the first sort of 19 or 20 years, I had Mercury retrograde progressed in my natal chart, which is a big deal with somebody who has a Gemini ascendant. And it does, when I think back to what I was up to as a child, I did struggle at school. Academia didn't come naturally to me. When I came out of school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. My choice in my career choices were not recognised by the college that I had applied to go to, so I couldn't study astronomy, and so I was really disappointed that I didn't have astronomy. That's all I wanted to do basically, and so I didn't get into that college, and I kind of tried out loads of different things. So I was kind of a little bit lost, but it went direct. So Mercury went direct. And the thing is, it's interesting to look at the degree. So it went retrograde at 234 of Aquarius, which is on obviously my Mercury placement, and it went direct at 16 degrees 30, which is, it went past my sun in Capricorn, which is 1743. So basically, this was a Mercury retrograde, which was kind of very important because for a Capricorn, with a Gemini ascendant, Mercury had to come and have a conversation with the sun and then turn direct again. So he was turning direct essentially on my sun. And then for the next however many years until he got to this is the point, until he gets to 2 Aquarius again by progression, that means that I am still in my pre-shadow period and post-shadow. So essentially, actually, what's interesting is that October 2021 is when I had my actual Mercury return to its natal position by progression in my natal chart. So that means that for my entire life, Mercury has been retrograde, and then, okay, he's been direct since I was about 20, but he still hasn't reached the point that he was at when I was born. So you could almost think of October 2021 as the rebirth of my Mercury, who has joined his natal position and is now moving forward. And so obviously that is quite poignant. However, there's other interesting things to observe. Before I move on, I will say that with that phenomena, it's interesting because my entire life has felt like I am going backwards. I had lots of meetings with people who, relationships and challenging situations that I had to deal with, a real lack of direction. Around my Saturn return was, and I had a bit more of direction, but I really didn't know what I was supposed to be doing, and I just felt like I was just coasting life. And when I say coasting, not that I found it easy, but I was just doing what I could to make it easy for myself. As Mercury's getting closer and closer and closer to its natal position by progression, I feel like I'm falling more and more into who I am and who I was here to be. So that's why I feel like there is a sense of like unfinished business about Mercury retrograde, particularly by progression. I'm going to have to do a show on progressions probably. In fact, maybe I need to speak to Philip and get him back on, because I know he's a bit of a progressions nut, basically, more so than myself. I'm very interested in progressions, and perhaps I can study up on them as well. And maybe I did get a really great book for my birthday in 2021 called The Eagle and the Lark. I think it was by Bernadette Brady. Am I right? I don't know. I'm not sure if I've got it right next to me, actually. No, I don't. But apparently that is a great book. It's recommended to me about progressions, but I always have a massive reading list that I'm never quite caught up on. So that's something I'm definitely going to study up on. But yeah, progressions very crudely. The sun moves a degree. So literally count from your birthday in the ephemeris, and a day, every day is a day where the sun moves about a degree. And so, like 20 days after your birthday will take you to your 20th year. And so for me, being born in January 1983, after my birthday, so where are we, 8th of January, so we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, approximately. So 20 days takes me to the 28th of January. Mercury had turned direct the day before. On my 20th birthday, the moon changed from Cancer to Leo, and I had Mercury at 16 Capricorn, Venus was at 27 of Aquarius, Mars was at 8 Pisces, and Jupiter, and so on, basically. So you can look at that, and the progressed chart will be basically what it says in the ephemeris. So for your 20th year, it will be 20 days after your birthday, and that's where all the planets will be in your progressed chart. It's another whole different discussion, but just for the sake of talking about Mercury retrograde natally, I thought it was worth bringing it up because there really feels like there's some kind of importance to that. And, I know a couple of people, the girl that I used to do my podcast show with, previously, Shana, she was born when Mercury was stationing. So Mercury wasn't retrograde, it was stationing at that point. And I also was in a relationship with a guy for a long time who had a Gemini moon, and his Mercury was stationing as well. His was stationed direct, so he was born on the day that Mercury was slowing down to go forward. So interestingly, depending on when you're born, it's worth taking a look at. Even if you weren't born with Mercury retrograde, it's worth looking. So you could have been born, say you were born the same year as me, you could have been born on the 1st of January, and then on the 7th of January or the 8th of January, Mercury turned stationed retrograde. So you could have been born, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So about a week after you were born, Mercury would turn retrograde. So that means at about 7 years old, Mercury turned retrograde for you, and you've got another 7 years worth of Mercury retrograde post shadow to work through until it returns to your natal position, if that makes any sense whatsoever. So either way, it's worth having a look to see whether you've got Mercury retrograde, when in the retrograde period it started. So whether you were born on the day it was retrograde, whether you were born on the day it was turning direct, if you were slap bang in the middle, if you were born a week before Mercury retrograde, if you were born a week after. Generally, if you were born when Mercury was turned direct, then it means that you haven't really got to deal with Mercury retrograde in your lifetime, most likely, because you won't, it's by progression anyway, because it's not really going to turn retrograde again for another couple of months, which it depends. If you live until you're like 100, maybe you might see it, but yeah, not too likely, I would have thought. And you can do that for the other planets as well, for Venus and Mars. But yeah, the other things about Mercury retrograde which are really interesting if you've got it in your natal chart is that some astrologers tend to think that you are more able to cope with Mercury retrograde, that there is you're more in tune with it moving backwards or appearing to move backwards, so you are able to connect with it on that level, and so it kind of doesn't phase you as much. I don't know about that. I think that we all feel Mercury retrograde, and it does impact us all. I've been impacted negatively by Mercury retrograde a number of times. Making mistakes, the classic Mercury retrograde stuff. I don't think that having Mercury retrograde natally makes it easier for me to deal with that. I think that maybe I am a practical person because I'm a Capricorn, so I always pay attention to when Mercury's turning retrograde and think about backing up my phone and making sure that everything's okay with all my files and, all that sort of thing. And you still have these problems and these mistakes that happen. Sometimes it's unavoidable. Mercury retrograde also where it falls in your chart. If it's over your ascendant, you can almost guarantee that your life's going to be a little bit back to front for a while in some way or another. It's interesting because I had Venus retrograde over my ascendant in 2020, and that happened when we turned our living room. We got new furniture delivered, and our whole living room was turned the opposite way round, and it's actually a much nicer way to have it, and it felt like a new place, but it was like everything was reversed for a while, and it was like a kind of like furniture and stuff and objects that we'd accumulated that we were just sort of like rearranging. Whereas when Mercury turned retrograde in Gemini, which that went over my ascendant, that was redecorating and switching bedrooms in the flat, and like reorganizing everything. So it obviously impacted me. It didn't go past without me knowing, and it was a tough time as well because it was eclipse season. But you've got things like that going on. If it falls on your descendant, then it could be that other people come back into your life, exes and things like that, or talking about old times and old relationships and that kind of thing. And Mercury retrograde can be a good time to go away on holiday. So by transit, Mercury retrograde can impact you. I'm sorry, I don't think that it couldn't. I don't think that it's possible that it couldn't. If it was going over your career point in your chart, then it's likely you'd be thinking about either going back to an old job, or maybe you'd be thinking about like rethinking your career path in some way. So, and it has a relationship with everything that it comes into contact with in the chart, and the area of your chart that it is retrograde in is going to be quite instrumental during that period. And maybe you might have to pay more attention if it's transiting one of your outer planets, for example. But if it's coming in contact with a personal planet or a more social planet, then I think it will be more obvious. And like I said, this goes with the personal planets, all of them when they're retrograde. So it's definitely one to sort of tune into and keep an eye on. But when it's natal, it kind of, I suppose what I want to leave you with, and this is really the truth of it, with Mercury retrograde, is it just means that you take a little bit longer to get where you need to go in life. If you look at the areas of your chart that Mercury retrograde, or that Mercury rules, so for me it's my first house and my fourth house, that's where I'm using equal here. I've got Gemini rising and I've got Virgo on my fourth house cusp. And if I think about how that affects me, I have taken a long time to really feel like I've got to where I should be in life, and on the doing me, being me, and where I'm supposed to be in life. So you could say that Mercury being my chart ruler and reaching that point, particularly funnily enough, if we're thinking about the fact that my progressed Mercury has returned to its natal position in October 2021, it's almost like everything's sort of slotted into place as it should be. However, it may differ for each individual. However, for me, buying a property, I always wanted to get on the property ladder, but I, had issues with there were a number of issues with me getting on the property ladder, and I tried moving out a number of times and living in different places with different people, and I never really found my roots. I never really found what I could call home. I still don't really feel like where I am is really where I'm supposed to be, but it's one step closer to being settled and rooted in a fourth house sense. Fourth house and family matters didn't come to me very naturally, and I had obviously a lot of unfinished business to work through perhaps before I got there. And in the same way, I think that because my Mercury retrograde is my ascendant ruler, it kind of also overshadowed my entire direction in life and what I'm supposed to be doing. And when you find what you're supposed to be doing and you work really hard on it, you put a lot of time and effort into making it happen, there's a point where it begins to sort of gain its own momentum and sort of take on its own kind of role in your life. It almost becomes your natural kind of modus operandi. So what does Mercury rule in your chart? What does it rule in your chart? And if you were born with Mercury retrograde, do you find that those areas of your life, for example, Mercury could be the ruler of your descendant and perhaps your 10th house, for example. Do you find that it took you a long time to find the right relationship? Took you a long time to really feel like you were able to settle down with somebody? And did you have issues around career where you weren't sure? You tried everything, you did all sorts of things, but it took you a while to really get on track with your career choices. And also, at which ages do you really feel like that fell into place for you? Because did that coincide with when Mercury was doing something important, like maybe making a conjunction with your Sun or with your Mars, for example, or opposing a planet by progression? It's a very crude example. You can do progressions on astro.com. There is a way to have a look at your progressions and see where things are. And there's also a way of, obviously the very simple way of looking through the ephemeris and just having a look, counting up to even the age that you are now, day by day, and just having a look and seeing where your planetary placements are. I hope you found it interesting. Mercury retrograde natally is definitely something that kind of it's definitely important, but it doesn't mean, if you struggled, some people with Mercury retrograde, because they're so internal with their thought processes, and they have their unique way of seeing the world, they can feel a little bit misunderstood, and things can be a bit difficult. But that doesn't mean that you've got problems. It's just that you are it's much more internalized. It's a more personalized communication style, and you're more in contact with the kind of analytical process that Mercury can offer. So it's not, like I've said with many things, you've got to this point in your life probably without even thinking about this kind of thing, and now that you're looking at your natal chart and realizing, I've got this and I've got that going on in my chart, it makes it easier for you to kind of obsess over whether or not that's the right thing to do, whether it should be this way or it should be that way. Don't worry about that sort of thing. And in the same way with Venus and Mars, you can look at your progressed, at which points in your life you're dealing with a progressed. I'm just checking to see whether I've got Venus or Mars going into retrograde at any point in my lifespan, and I don't think I do. But if these planets tend to, by progression, kind of indicate periods where we have stuff to go back over and work on. Some people halfway through their life will suddenly go into like Mars retrograde, and then Mars retrograde will be retrograde for the rest of their life, by progression and that kind of thing. So it's just an interesting thing to observe, but definitely pay attention to the areas of life, the houses that Mercury rules in your chart, and think about your relationship with that house and anything that could be associated with it. If it's the second house, did you have problems with ownership in any way? Did it take you a long time to really connect with what was truly important to you and what you really value? Did you struggle with finding a job that paid you what you felt you were worth, or did you not think you were worth much? And maybe if it's third house, did you struggle with making social connections? Did you have communication issues when you were younger? Did it take you a while to really find a subject that you were really interested in when it came to studying? These kind of things. Like if you work through the houses and try and figure out, if it took you longer to get where you were going, and if you've reached that point where you know where you're going yet, or if you're still working on it, definitely check out the progressed side of Mercury, and also have a look at what it means for you personally. So, and also particularly if you're a Gemini, or you've got a Gemini moon, or you've got a Gemini ascendant, or a Virgo moon, Virgo ascendant, it will be even more important for you. Hopefully you found it useful. Please let me know if you did. You know, I don't know how many people will contact me asking this, but if I can and you can't figure it out, I will try my best to explain. I'll have a look at your chart and tell you when Mercury went retrograde in your chart, you know, which day. I'll see for you and see if I can find out for you. So if you're not sure, just get in touch. Stephanie@stelliumastrology.com. That's STEFANIE. And hopefully I won't be inundated, and I'll have a manageable amount of people getting in touch asking me to just check their chart and tell them when Mercury turned retrograde, and, you know, if I can tell them by progression when it's going direct or whatever. So hopefully you enjoyed the episode. Let me know if you did, and yeah, if you can, leave me a review. That would be wonderful. If you're listening or watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe and like. And if you're enjoying it and you'd like updates when I'm putting videos out, hit the bell. And yeah, I've got a Patreon page. Don't forget to check that out. And yeah, I'll speak to you guys soon. Take care. Bye now.